I watched my parents pacing my living room through the glowing screen of my security camera app. They were running a measuring tape across my hardwood floors, plotting to move my deadbeat brother into my home while I was supposed to be on a flight to London. Once his gaming setup and the heavy furniture are moved in, she will not make a scene, my mother told my father. She is too obsessed with keeping the peace. She will just accept it. They thought they had outsmarted me. They had no idea I had already sold the house out from under them. Before I tell you how I turned my own home into the ultimate trap, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member. My name is Lauren, 33 years old, and I work as an estate liquidator. The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark interior of my parked car. I sat in silence watching the live feed from the hidden cameras I use for my business. My mother Barbara and my father Richard were standing right in the middle of my living room. My father held the end of a yellow measuring tape against the baseboard while my mother pulled it across the room toward the fireplace. "We can fit the sectional sofa right here," my father said, his voice coming through the audio feed, crisp and clear. My mother nodded, crossing her arms. "Once his gaming setup and the heavy furniture are moved in, she will not make a scene. She is too obsessed with keeping the peace. She will just accept it." I did not cry. I did not feel a single tear prick my eyes. After a lifetime of dealing with their manipulation, the shock had worn off years ago. Instead, my mind went to work with cold calculation. My business involves managing highly valuable assets. I go into the homes of people who have recently passed away or moved to assisted living, and I catalog, appraise, and sell their entire lifetime of belongings. Because I often bring high-value items back to my own home to photograph and stage for online auctions, security is my top priority. I had installed a state-of-the-art motion-activated camera system disguised as everyday objects. A camera in a smoke detector, another in a digital clock on the mantel. My parents had been in my house dozens of times and never noticed them. They thought they were completely alone. I watched them measure my dining room next, planning where to put my 30-year-old brother Kevin and all of his belongings. They were moving him into my house behind my back. But to understand how we got to this point of absolute betrayal, you have to look at what happened just 48 hours earlier. It was a Friday night, and I had reluctantly attended our mandatory family dinner at my parents' suburban house. The dining room table was set with my mother's good china, a pathetic attempt to make the evening feel elegant. But the atmosphere was thick with tension. Kevin sat across from me, picking at his roast beef with a sulky expression on his face. Kevin is the golden child. Everything comes easy to him, or rather, my parents make it easy for him. His latest venture was a cryptocurrency startup. He had poured all of his money and a significant chunk of my parents' savings into a digital coin that plummeted to zero overnight. Now he was broke, facing eviction from his luxury apartment and looking for a bailout. "I need a place to crash," Kevin announced, suddenly dropping his fork onto his plate. "My lease is up on Tuesday and the landlord refuses to extend it." My mother immediately cooed over him, patting his hand. "Oh, sweetheart, we will figure it out. You know you can always come home." But Kevin shook his head, looking directly at me. "I do not want to move back into my old childhood bedroom. It is too small for my streaming equipment. Lauren has that massive 4-bedroom house in the suburbs all to herself. I should just take her guest rooms." I almost choked on my water. I set my glass down and looked at him, waiting for the punchline. When he did not laugh, I realized he was entirely serious. "No," I said flatly. "Absolutely not." The room went dead silent. My father dropped his napkin onto his lap and glared at me. "Excuse me," he demanded. I kept my voice calm and even. I said no. "Kevin is not moving into my house. I use one guest room for my estate liquidation inventory, another as my home office, and the third is for actual guests, not permanent squatters." Kevin scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Come on, Lauren. You do not even use half that space. You are just hoarding empty rooms while your own brother is about to be homeless. You are not going to be homeless, I replied. Mom and Dad literally just offered you your old room. You just do not want it because it is not big enough for your video games. That is not my problem. Kevin pushed his plate away entirely. It is not just about the space, he whined to our parents. I need a quiet environment to brainstorm my next startup. Her neighborhood is gated. It has a community pool. It is exactly the kind of atmosphere I need to get my creative juices flowing again. Plus, she travels all the time for her estate sales. Half the time, the house is empty anyway. I stared at him in sheer disbelief. You want to move into my gated community so you can use my neighborhood pool while you are unemployed. It is called networking, Lauren. Kevin snapped back. You would not understand. You just sell dead people's old junk. I am trying to build the future of finance. My father pointed a finger at me across the table. Do not belittle your brother's ambitions. He is an entrepreneur. He takes risks. You just play it safe selling antique furniture. You have 4 bedrooms, Lauren. 4. It is completely unreasonable for one single woman to take up that much space. Dad, I bought that house with my own money. I stated, my voice remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I paid the down payment. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. It is not a family asset to be divided up whenever Kevin fails at something new. Kevin had always been jealous of my home. It was a beautiful, sprawling, mid-century modern build sitting on a half-acre lot. I had spent 2 years renovating it, refinishing the original hardwood floors, updating the massive chef's kitchen, and turning the backyard into a private oasis. It was my pride and joy, a physical manifestation of every long hour I had worked. To Kevin, it was just free real estate. He did not see the sweat and stress that went into it. He only saw a luxury playground that he felt entitled to by virtue of being the family favorite. My mother let out a dramatic theatrical sigh. Money, money, money. That is all you ever talk about. You are so obsessed with your little business that you have completely lost your sense of compassion. What kind of sister watches her brother struggle and refuses to throw him a lifeline? The kind of sister who remembers the last time she threw him a lifeline, I shot back. Do you remember 2 years ago when I hired Kevin to help me catalog a massive estate? He stole a vintage luxury watch from the property and pawned it. I had to pay the grieving widow out of my own pocket to avoid a lawsuit. That was a simple misunderstanding, my mother shouted, her face flushing red. He thought it was being thrown away. You always bring up the past to justify your current selfishness. Stealing a $10,000 watch is not a misunderstanding, Mom. It is a crime. And it is the exact reason he will never have a key to my house. My father leaned forward, his face turning an angry shade of red. You listen to me. Family helps family. You have more money than you know what to do with, and you live entirely alone. You are a 33-year-old spinster obsessed with your bank account. The least you can do is open your doors to your brother. The word spinster hung in the air, a deliberate barb meant to tear me down. They always resorted to personal attacks when they did not get their way. They could not stand that I was financially independent and did not rely on them for anything. I stood up from the table, picking up my purse. I am not discussing this anymore. My house is my sanctuary. Kevin is not moving in. Period. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear Kevin complaining loudly behind me. I told you she was a selfish witch. She only cares about herself. My mother called out after me. You will regret turning your back on us, Lauren. We will not forget this. I drove home that night with my hands gripping the steering wheel tight, replaying the argument in my head. I thought I had set a firm boundary. I thought saying no would be the end of it. I severely underestimated their entitlement. That argument had ended with me walking out the door. I had spent Saturday and Sunday thinking the storm had passed, but now looking at my phone screen on Sunday night, I realized the argument had not been the end. It had been the catalyst. They had realized they could not bully me into giving them the house, so they had decided to just take it. I zoomed in on the security footage. My father was writing down the measurements on a yellow legal pad. My mother was taking pictures of the walls, probably planning where to put Kevin's massive television screens. I leaned back against the leather seat of my car and took a deep breath. For a moment, a wave of profound sadness washed over me. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, respect me, and love me. Instead, they were conspiring to invade my home, knowing I was leaving for a 2-week trip to London the next morning. They planned to move him in, establish his residency, and force me into a legal nightmare upon my return. They assumed I would break. They assumed I would cry, yell, and eventually surrender to their demands, because fighting them was too exhausting. But they did not know everything. They did not know that my trip to London was just a cover story. And they certainly did not know that the 4-bedroom house they were currently measuring no longer belonged to me. I watched my parents pacing my living room through the glowing screen of my security camera app. They were running a measuring tape across my hardwood floors, plotting to move my deadbeat brother into my home while I was supposed to be on a flight to London. Once his gaming setup and the heavy furniture are moved in, she will not make a scene, my mother told my father. She is too obsessed with keeping the peace. She will just accept it. They thought they had outsmarted me. They had no idea I had already sold the house out from under them. Before I tell you how I turned my own home into the ultimate trap, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member. My name is Lauren, 33 years old, and I work as an estate liquidator. The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark interior of my parked car. I sat in silence watching the live feed from the hidden cameras I use for my business. My mother Barbara and my father Richard were standing right in the middle of my living room. My father held the end of a yellow measuring tape against the baseboard while my mother pulled it across the room toward the fireplace. "We can fit the sectional sofa right here," my father said, his voice coming through the audio feed crisp and clear. My mother nodded, crossing her arms. Once his gaming setup and the heavy furniture are moved in, she will not make a scene. She is too obsessed with keeping the peace. She will just accept it. I did not cry. I did not feel a single tear prick my eyes. After a lifetime of dealing with their manipulation, the shock had worn off years ago. Instead, my mind went to work with cold calculation. My business involves managing highly valuable assets. I go into the homes of people who have recently passed away or moved to assisted living, and I catalog, appraise, and sell their entire lifetime of belongings. Because I often bring high-value items back to my own home to photograph and stage for online auctions, security is my top priority. I had installed a state-of-the-art motion-activated camera system disguised as everyday objects, a camera in a smoke detector, another in a digital clock on the mantel. My parents had been in my house dozens of times and never noticed them. They thought they were completely alone. I watched them measure my dining room, next planning where to put my 30-year-old brother Kevin and all of his belongings. They were moving him into my house behind my back. But to understand how we got to this point of absolute betrayal, you have to look at what happened just 48 hours earlier. It was a Friday night, and I had reluctantly attended our mandatory family dinner at my parents' suburban house. The dining room table was set with my mother's good china, a pathetic attempt to make the evening feel elegant. But the atmosphere was thick with tension. Kevin sat across from me, picking at his roast beef with a sulky expression on his face. Kevin is the golden child. Everything comes easy to him, or rather my parents make it easy for him. His latest venture was a cryptocurrency startup. He had poured all of his money and a significant chunk of my parents' savings into a digital coin that plummeted to zero overnight. Now he was broke, facing eviction from his luxury apartment and looking for a bailout. "I need a place to crash," Kevin announced, suddenly dropping his fork onto his plate. "My lease is up on Tuesday and the landlord refuses to extend it." My mother immediately cooed over him, patting his hand. "Oh, sweetheart, we will figure it out. You know you can always come home." But Kevin shook his head, looking directly at me. "I do not want to move back into my old childhood bedroom. It is too small for my streaming equipment. Lauren has that massive 4-bedroom house in the suburbs all to herself. I should just take her guest rooms." I almost choked on my water. I set my glass down and looked at him, waiting for the punchline. When he did not laugh, I realized he was entirely serious. "No," I said flatly, "absolutely not." The room went dead silent. My father dropped his napkin onto his lap and glared at me. "Excuse me," he demanded. I kept my voice calm and even. I said no. Kevin is not moving into my house. I use one guest room for my estate liquidation inventory, another as my home office, and the third is for actual guests, not permanent squatters. Kevin scoffed, rolling his eyes. Come on, Lauren. You do not even use half that space. You are just hoarding empty rooms while your own brother is about to be homeless. You are not going to be homeless, I replied. Mom and Dad literally just offered you your old room. You just do not want it because it is not big enough for your video games. That is not my problem. Kevin pushed his plate away entirely. It is not just about the space, he whined to our parents. I need a quiet environment to brainstorm my next startup. Her neighborhood is gated. It has a community pool. It is exactly the kind of atmosphere I need to get my creative juices flowing again. Plus, she travels all the time for her estate sales. Half the time, the house is empty anyway. I stared at him in sheer disbelief. You want to move into my gated community so you can use my neighborhood pool while you are unemployed. It is called networking, Lauren, Kevin snapped back. You would not understand. You just sell dead people's old junk. I am trying to build the future of finance. My father pointed a finger at me across the table. Do not belittle your brother's ambitions. He is an entrepreneur. He takes risks. You just play it safe selling antique furniture. You have 4 bedrooms, Lauren. 4. It is completely unreasonable for one single woman to take up that much space. Dad, I bought that house with my own money. I stated, my voice remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I paid the down payment. I pay the mortgage. I pay the property taxes. It is not a family asset to be divided up whenever Kevin fails at something new. Kevin had always been jealous of my home. It was a beautiful, sprawling, mid-century modern build sitting on a half-acre lot. I had spent 2 years renovating it, refinishing the original hardwood floors, updating the massive chef's kitchen, and turning the backyard into a private oasis. It was my pride and joy, a physical manifestation of every long hour I had worked. To Kevin, it was just free real estate. He did not see the sweat and stress that went into it. He only saw a luxury playground that he felt entitled to by virtue of being the family favorite. My mother let out a dramatic theatrical sigh. Money, money, money. That is all you ever talk about. You are so obsessed with your little business that you have completely lost your sense of compassion. What kind of sister watches her brother struggle and refuses to throw him a lifeline? The kind of sister who remembers the last time she threw him a lifeline, I shot back. Do you remember 2 years ago when I hired Kevin to help me catalog a massive estate? He stole a vintage luxury watch from the property and pawned it. I had to pay the grieving widow out of my own pocket to avoid a lawsuit. That was a simple misunderstanding, my mother shouted, her face flushing red. He thought it was being thrown away. You always bring up the past to justify your current selfishness. Stealing a $10,000 watch is not a misunderstanding, Mom. It is a crime. And it is the exact reason he will never have a key to my house. My father leaned forward, his face turning an angry shade of red. You listen to me. Family helps family. You have more money than you know what to do with, and you live entirely alone. You are a 33-year-old spinster obsessed with your bank account. The least you can do is open your doors to your brother. The word spinster hung in the air, a deliberate barb meant to tear me down. They always resorted to personal attacks when they did not get their way. They could not stand that I was financially independent and did not rely on them for anything. I stood up from the table, picking up my purse. I am not discussing this anymore. My house is my sanctuary. Kevin is not moving in. Period. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear Kevin complaining loudly behind me. I told you she was a selfish witch. She only cares about herself. My mother called out after me. You will regret turning your back on us, Lauren. We will not forget this. I drove home that night, with my hands gripping the steering wheel tight, replaying the argument in my head. I thought I had set a firm boundary. I thought saying no would be the end of it. I severely underestimated their entitlement. That argument had ended with me walking out the door. I had spent Saturday and Sunday thinking the storm had passed. But now, looking at my phone screen on Sunday night, I realized the argument had not been the end. It had been the catalyst. They had realized they could not bully me into giving them the house, so they had decided to just take it. I zoomed in on the security footage. My father was writing down the measurements on a yellow legal pad. My mother was taking pictures of the walls, probably planning where to put Kevin's massive television screens. I leaned back against the leather seat of my car and took a deep breath. For a moment, a wave of profound sadness washed over me. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, respect me, and love me. Instead, they were conspiring to invade my home, knowing I was leaving for a 2-week trip to London the next morning. They planned to move him in, establish his residency, and force me into a legal nightmare upon my return. They assumed I would break. They assumed I would cry, yell, and eventually surrender to their demands because fighting them was too exhausting. But they did not know everything. They did not know that my trip to London was just a cover story. And they certainly did not know that the 4-bedroom house they were currently measuring no longer belonged to me. To understand the sheer audacity of them standing in my living room tonight, you have to rewind to yesterday morning. It was Saturday, just hours after I had walked out of their house. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a cup of dark roast coffee and enjoying the quiet sanctuary of my home. My phone had been blissfully silent since the argument. No angry texts from my father, no guilt-tripping voicemails from my mother. The silence was highly unusual. Normally, walking out of a family dinner resulted in a barrage of messages demanding an apology. The lack of communication made me uneasy, like the drop in barometric pressure right before a severe storm. When the doorbell rang at 10 o'clock in the morning, my entire body tensed. I walked quietly to the front hallway and checked the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. My mother was standing on my front porch. She was alone. She was wearing a pleasant, relaxed expression, and in her hands she held a glass pie dish covered in aluminum foil. I stared at the monitor for a long moment. Barbara did not bake. She ordered catering for holidays and bought pastries from the expensive bakery downtown. Seeing her holding a homemade pie was like seeing a shark offering you a life jacket. It defied all logic. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, keeping my expression entirely neutral. My mother beamed at me. Her smile was wide and bright, stretching from ear to ear, completely devoid of the venom she had spit at me the night before. "Good morning, Lauren," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet tone that instantly set my teeth on edge. "I know I should have called first, but I wanted to surprise you. I brought you a cherry pie. It is your favorite, right?" I did not step aside to let her in. I just looked at the pie, then back up at her perfectly powdered face. "It is apple, actually," I replied. "My favorite is apple." "But thank you." "What are you doing here, Mom?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just a tiny tightening of the muscles around her mouth before she recovered her bright facade. She sighed heavily, letting her shoulders drop in a carefully calculated display of maternal vulnerability. "I came to apologize," she said softly. That single sentence sent alarm bells ringing so loudly in my head I could practically hear them. My mother never apologized. Even when she was blatantly, undeniably wrong, she would twist the narrative until she was the victim. An unprompted apology from her was not a peace offering. It was a Trojan horse. I stepped back and pulled the door open wider, gesturing for her to come inside. She walked into the foyer, immediately scanning the pristine space. I led her to the kitchen, where she set the pie dish carefully on the granite counter. "Your father and I were out of line last night," she began, turning to face me with her hands clasped in front of her. "We were just so stressed about your brother's situation. You know how Kevin gets when he is anxious. He lashes out and then we get defensive. We never should have called you selfish. You have worked very hard for this beautiful home." I leaned against the kitchen island, crossing my arms. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to sit in the discomfort of her own lies. The tension in the room was suffocating. I could see the gears turning in her head, calculating how much pride she needed to swallow to get what she wanted. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally responded, keeping my tone perfectly measured. It was extremely unfair to ask me to house a grown man who refuses to take responsibility for his own life. I'm glad you see that now. Yes, absolutely. She agreed far too quickly. We had a long talk with him after you left. We told him he needs to figure out his own living arrangements. He is going to put his things in a storage unit and stay at a cheap motel until he finds a new apartment. It will build character. The lie was so massive, so incredibly bold that it almost impressed me. Kevin would never agree to stay in a cheap motel. He considered himself a misunderstood genius who required luxury to function. He would sooner sleep in his car than downgrade his lifestyle. My mother was laying the groundwork for something big, and I needed to let her play her hand so I could see the full scope of the trap. Anyway, she continued waving her hand dismissively as if brushing away the entire conflict. I actually came over because I wanted to talk about your upcoming trip to London. You leave on Monday morning, right? Yes, I said. A 2-week vacation. I have had it booked for 6 months. That is exactly why I am here, she said, her eyes lighting up with manufactured excitement. I know you usually hire that neighborhood girl to come water your plants and grab your mail. But your father and I were talking and we thought, why pay a stranger when you have family right down the road? I stared at her, the pieces of the puzzle rapidly clicking into place. The sudden apology, the fake story about Kevin getting a storage unit, the unexpected visit. It all painted a terrifyingly clear picture. They wanted access to my house. I would be happy to come by every day, my mother offered, taking a step closer to me. I can water all your lovely indoor plants. I can bring in the mail so it does not pile up and attract burglars. I can even turn different lights on and off in the evenings so the house looks occupied. You know how dangerous it is to leave a property empty for 2 whole weeks. It would give me peace of mind knowing your beautiful home is safe while you are overseas. The sheer audacity of her pitch was breathtaking. She was using my need for security to gain the keys to my kingdom. In her mind, she had crafted the perfect scheme. She would get the spare key, wait for my flight to take off, and then move Kevin and all his belongings right through my front door. By the time I returned from London 2 weeks later, Kevin would be firmly established. He would have his clothes in the closets, his food in the fridge, and his gaming rig set up in my guest room. They knew that eviction laws strongly protected anyone who could prove residency. They were planning to turn my brother into a legal squatter in my own home, banking on the fact that I would be too exhausted and averse to conflict to drag my own family through a messy, prolonged court battle. I looked at her eager, expectant face. She thought I was oblivious. She thought her sweet mother routine had completely disarmed me. That is a very generous offer, Mom, I said, allowing my voice to soften just enough to sell the performance. I was actually a bit worried about leaving the house empty for that long. It would be a huge relief to have you check on things. Her eyes gleamed with triumphant satisfaction. She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture so forced it made my skin crawl. That is what mothers are for, Lauren. We look out for our girls. Just give me the spare key and you will not have to worry about a single thing. I walked over to the hook by the garage door and retrieved the silver spare key. I felt the cool metal press into my palm. Giving this to her felt like handing over the weapon for my own execution, but I knew that to catch them in the act, I had to open the cage. I turned around and dropped the key into her outstretched hand. Thank you, I said, smiling warmly. I really appreciate this. My mother closed her fist around the key tightly. Have a wonderful trip to London, sweetheart. Have a pint at a pub for me. We will handle everything here. I walked her to the front door and watched her march down the driveway to her car. There was a spring in her step, a visible energy of victory radiating from her posture. She had secured the asset. She had won. I closed the door and threw the deadbolt. The fake smile dropped from my face instantly. I did not go to my bedroom to pack a suitcase for London. Instead, I walked straight to the home office where I keep the central hub for my estate liquidation security equipment. When you liquidate estates worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, you cannot rely on cheap, easily hackable consumer cameras. I use high-end professional-grade surveillance gear. They are motion-activated, night vision capable, and transmit encrypted real-time audio and video directly to my private server. They are completely undetectable unless you know exactly what to look for. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and accessed the master control panel. I typed in my credentials and brought up the system diagnostics. I had a camera built into the housing of the air purifier in the hallway. I had another concealed inside the binding of a thick hardcover book on the living room shelf. I had a third hidden behind the speaker mesh of the sound system in the dining room. I clicked the mouse, switching all the cameras from standby mode to active armed status. The screen populated with crystal clear, high-definition views of my empty house. I checked the audio feeds, ensuring the microphones were picking up even the faintest sounds. Everything was green. Everything was online. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the grid of camera feeds on my monitor. My mother thought she had played me perfectly. She thought her fake apology and her cherry pie had blinded me to her true intentions. But she forgot one crucial detail. I make my living by evaluating what things are truly worth and spotting fakes from a mile away. I knew they were going to invade my home. I had handed them the key to let them do it. I just needed to sit back, wait for them to cross the threshold, and let the cameras capture every single moment of their betrayal. Which brings us back to right now, sitting in my car on Sunday night, watching my parents measure my living room floors for my brother's furniture. They had no idea they had just stepped into a trap from which there was absolutely no escape. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. Through the live feed on my phone, I watched my father roll up his measuring tape. He slapped it against his palm, nodding at my mother. They exchanged a few words before walking out of the camera frame. A moment later, I heard the clunk of my front door shutting, followed by the click of the deadbolt. My mother was making sure she locked up properly, securing the home she was currently in the process of stealing. I stared at the frozen image of my empty living room. My chest felt tight with profound disappointment. I had expected them to snoop. I had not expected a coordinated home invasion. Processing their betrayal, my phone screen shifted. The security feed was pushed to the background as a text message notification popped up. It was from Kevin. I tapped the banner, opening our thread. The last text he had sent me was over 2 months ago, asking for $50. Now staring back at me was a brand new message sent just seconds ago. "Have a good trip, sis," the text read. "Thanks for always looking out for me. Cannot wait for my new chapter." I read the words 3 times. The audacity was physically nauseating. He was not just moving into my house behind my back. He was taunting me. My parents had likely just called him from my driveway, confirming that the measurements worked. Kevin was sitting in his soon-to-be evicted apartment, sending me a fake bon voyage text to solidify his alibi. He wanted a digital paper trail showing that we were on good terms, just in case I tried to involve the police later. He could claim I had given him permission. It was a calculated, manipulative move. My hand gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the key in the ignition. I wanted to speed back down the block and pull into my driveway just as my parents were getting into their car. I wanted to march up to them, hold my phone in their faces, and demand an explanation. I wanted to watch them panic as they realized they had been caught. But my hand froze. I closed my eyes and played out exactly how that confrontation would go. It was a toxic dance we had performed 100 times before. If I confronted them now, my mother would instantly pivot to playing the victim. She would say they were simply measuring the room to buy me a surprise piece of furniture. My father would accuse me of invading their privacy by secretly recording them. They would gaslight me, twist the narrative, and somehow make me the villain for not trusting my own family. I opened my eyes. Confronting them was a losing game. You cannot argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. If I threw a fit, I would just be giving them exactly what they expected. I would be the hysterical, dramatic daughter making a scene over nothing. No, I was not going to make a scene. I was going to let them win. Or at least I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to let them commit so deeply to their illegal scheme that there would be absolutely no way for them to back out. I took a long breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. The anger boiling in my chest began to cool, hardening into pure resolve. I swiped away Kevin's text message without replying. I had a much better game in mind. For the past 6 months, I had been keeping a massive secret of my own. My estate liquidation business had been incredibly successful. I had quietly purchased a stunning, ultra-secure penthouse in a high-rise building right in the center of the downtown financial district. It had 24-hour concierge service and a strict security team. It was the perfect sanctuary, completely inaccessible to my family. I had been slowly moving my most valuable personal items to the penthouse for weeks. But my current house, the 4-bedroom property my parents were plotting to steal, was still legally mine. I had quietly put it on the market as a pocket listing, meaning it was not publicly advertised online where my family could stumble across it. I had received a few offers, but I had been waiting for the right buyer. Now the timing could not be more perfect. I opened my contacts and pressed the call button for David, my real estate broker. It was nearly 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, but in the high-stakes world of luxury real estate brokers always answer their phones. Lauren David said, his voice bright and energetic. "Good evening. To what do I owe the pleasure of a Sunday night call? Have you finally made a decision about the house?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I want to accept the all-cash offer we discussed on Friday, the one from the buyer who needed immediate possession." David let out a low whistle of excitement. "Fantastic news. Valerie is going to be thrilled. She has been calling me twice a day, completely desperate to get into a property. Her corporate relocation package expires soon, and she hates staying in hotels. She offered 10% over your asking price, but her contingency is that we have to close almost immediately. She wants the keys by Tuesday morning at the absolute latest." Tuesday morning was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. I am supposed to fly to London tomorrow morning. I lied smoothly, maintaining my cover story even to my broker. But I have already packed all my personal belongings. The house is completely empty except for some rented staging furniture. I can sign the closing documents electronically tomorrow. Tell Valerie she can have the property. David chuckled, clearly thrilled by the commission he was about to earn. "You are a lifesaver, Lauren. Valerie is a high-profile client, and keeping her happy is a top priority. She is a district attorney transferring from out of state to take over a major division downtown. She expects things done strictly by the book. I will get the title company to rush the paperwork first thing tomorrow morning." A district attorney. The words echoed in my mind, sweet as honey. My parents were not just plotting to break into an empty house. They were about to move my deadbeat brother and all his garbage directly into the private residence of a ruthless district attorney. The sheer poetic justice of it was almost too perfect to be real. "Tell Valerie I am thrilled to pass the house on to her," I told David. "Tell her she can move her things in as soon as the funds clear and the deed is recorded. She does not even need to wait for the staging furniture to be removed. I will handle that separately." I hung up the phone and stared out the windshield at the dark, quiet street. The trap was finally set. The perfect bait was in place. All I had to do now was step aside and let the predators walk right into the cage. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the dark curb, leaving my toxic old life behind in the rearview mirror. The drive back to my neighborhood was a blur of streetlights and shifting shadows. I kept my foot steady on the gas pedal, allowing the rhythmic hum of the engine to calm the lingering adrenaline in my veins. My neighborhood was silent when I finally pulled into the driveway. The motion sensor lights flickered on, casting a harsh white glare across the manicured lawn and the pristine exterior of the house I was about to surrender. I walked through the front door, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place behind me with a satisfying metallic thud. The house was exactly as my parents had left it after their little measuring session. I walked straight past the living room and headed down the hall to my home office. There was no time to sit and wallow in the reality of their betrayal. I had work to do. I knelt beside my desk and pulled out the heavy fireproof safe hidden beneath the bottom drawer. The keypad chirped as I typed in my passcode. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing neat stacks of essential paperwork. I began pulling out birth certificates, social security cards, old tax returns, and the physical ledgers for my estate liquidation business. I was placing the documents into a reinforced leather briefcase when the sharp, sudden ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet of the house. I glanced at the screen resting on my desk. The caller ID displayed a photo of my Aunt Patricia. Patricia was my mother's older sister and her most fiercely loyal enabler. They shared the same toxic mindset, the same inflated sense of entitlement, and the exact same habit of treating my brother Kevin like a fragile, misunderstood prince. A call from Patricia at this hour meant my mother had already been working the phone spinning a narrative of my supposed cruelty to the rest of the extended family. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the incoming assault, and swiped the green button to accept the call. "Lauren, what on earth is wrong with you?" Patricia demanded. She did not bother with a greeting. Her voice was shrill and vibrating with aggressive self-righteousness. "Your mother just called me in absolute tears. She said you walked out of family dinner and refused to help your own brother when he is facing eviction. I cannot believe you would be so heartless." I kept my voice low and perfectly controlled. "Good evening to you too, Aunt Patricia. I am not being heartless. I am setting a boundary. Kevin is 30 years old. It is not my responsibility to house him just because his cryptocurrency gamble went bankrupt." "That is exactly the kind of selfish attitude your mother was crying about," Patricia snapped back. The line crackled slightly as she raised her voice. "You have an entire business, Lauren, an entire estate liquidation company that makes hand over fist in profit. If you are so obsessed with hoarding your empty bedrooms, the absolute least you could do is offer Kevin a job. You could hire him as an inventory manager or an appraiser. You could help him get back on his feet and earn a decent living instead of treating him like a charity case." The suggestion was so absurd that I actually let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Give Kevin a job," I repeated, the incredulity bleeding into my tone. "Aunt Patricia, I did give Kevin a job. 2 years ago." Did Mom conveniently forget to include that detail in her tearful phone call tonight? There was a brief, tense silence on the other end of the line. "Your mother mentioned that things did not work out because you were too demanding as a boss," Patricia said defensively. "She said you expected him to work unreasonable hours for entry-level pay. He was fired because he is a thief," I stated bluntly. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool surface of my desk. I gave him a job cataloging an estate for a grieving widow in the historic district. It was a high-profile contract. I trusted him to inventory the master bedroom. "Do you want to know what he actually did, Patricia?" "He pocketed a vintage 1960 Patek Philippe watch belonging to the widow's late husband. He walked right out the front door with it and pawned it downtown the very next afternoon to pay off a gambling debt." "You are a liar!" Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with sudden fury. "Kevin would never do something like that. You are just making up stories to justify your own stinginess. You have always been jealous of him." "I am not lying." I continued, refusing to let her interrupt my momentum. "The pawnshop owner recognized the serial number from a stolen property registry and called me because my business card was on file. I had to withdraw $10,000 from my own business operating account to buy the watch back and return it to the widow before she called the police and ruined my professional reputation. When I confronted Mom and Dad about it, they told me to drop it. They called it a simple misunderstanding. They said Kevin was just under a lot of stress and that I should consider the $10,000 a contribution to his mental health. So no, Aunt Patricia. Kevin will never work for me again, and he will never have a key to my home." "You are a toxic, miserable spinster," Patricia yelled into the receiver. "You hoard your money and your space because you have no one to love you. Do not bother coming to Thanksgiving this year. You are completely cut off." Before I could say another word, she slammed the phone down. The dial tone echoed in the quiet office. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. Patricia thought she was punishing me. She thought her words would sting, but all they did was validate everything I was currently doing. The entire family was a coordinated network of enablers, and I felt absolutely zero guilt about the trap I was preparing to spring. I tossed the phone onto the desk and opened my laptop. It was time to finalize the secret weapon that would dismantle their entitlement for good. As I logged into my encrypted email account, I saw a message waiting for me from my real estate broker, David. The subject line read, "Urgent closing documents for Valerie." I clicked the secure link and a massive digital contract populated my screen. For the past several months, I had been executing a quiet, strategic exit from my old life. My estate liquidation business had experienced unprecedented growth over the last 2 years, yielding profits that far exceeded what my family believed I earned. With that wealth, I had purchased a breathtaking, ultra-secure penthouse in the heart of the downtown financial district. The building featured biometric scanners, 24-hour armed concierge service, and private elevator access. It was a fortress designed to keep out unwanted visitors, namely my family. I had been slowly and discreetly moving my most valuable personal possessions, my artwork, my sensitive files, and my high-end wardrobe to the penthouse. But this 4-bedroom suburban house remained a loose end. I had listed it privately, refusing to put a sign in the yard or market it on public websites where my parents could see it. I had been holding out for a cash buyer who wanted a seamless transaction. David had found the perfect candidate in Valerie. Valerie was a phenomenon in the legal world. She was relocating to the city to take over as the new district attorney. Her reputation preceded her. She was notoriously ruthless, a no-nonsense prosecutor who had spent the last decade dismantling organized crime rings and corrupt political operations. She did not tolerate fools, and she certainly did not tolerate the breaking of the law. David had informed me that Valerie was living out of a corporate suite and was aggressively searching for a permanent, secure residence. She loved the layout of my home and the gated community, but her stipulations were brutal. She demanded immediate possession. I scrolled through the dense legal jargon of the purchase agreement. Valerie's lawyers had drafted a hyper-accelerated closing schedule. Because it was an all-cash transaction with no mortgage underwriting required, the traditional waiting periods were bypassed. I navigated to the final page of the contract. The stipulation was outlined in bold text. The title would transfer, and the property would legally belong to Valerie at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday, which was tomorrow. The exact morning I was supposed to be flying to London. The brilliance of the timing felt like destiny. My parents were planning to move Kevin into a house they thought belonged to their passive, people-pleasing daughter. Instead, they were going to be breaking and entering into the private residence of the city's top prosecutor. I typed my digital signature on the buyer acceptance line. I initialed the waivers. I signed the transfer of deed. With one final click, the document was sealed and sent back to the title company. The house was gone. I was officially a guest in what used to be my own home. But I still had a massive logistical hurdle to overcome before the sun came up. The house needed to look exactly as it had when my parents measured it hours ago, but it could not contain any of my actual property. Over the past 3 nights, while my family thought I was packing for a vacation, I had been orchestrating a highly coordinated midnight swap. Tonight was the final phase of that operation. I checked my watch. It was nearing 1 o'clock in the morning. Right on cue, the faint rumble of a heavy diesel engine vibrated through the floorboards. I walked to the front window and peeked through the blinds. A large unmarked box truck was reversing down my long driveway, its headlights extinguished to avoid waking the neighbors. 2 smaller cargo vans pulled in behind it. I opened the garage door and a crew of 5 men stepped out of the shadows. These were not standard movers. They were a discreet premium logistics team I frequently used for high-value estate clearouts. They specialized in moving fragile, priceless antiques in the dead of night for wealthy clients who demanded absolute privacy. I had paid them triple their usual rate for this weekend assignment. "Let us finish this up," I told the crew foreman, a towering man named Hector. "We have exactly 4 hours before the sun comes up." Hector nodded, signaling his men. They moved with silent, practiced efficiency. Over the next 2 hours, they carefully wrapped my authentic mid-century modern dining table, my custom velvet sectional sofa, and my solid oak bedroom furniture in thick padded blankets. They carried everything out through the garage, loading my real life into the unmarked truck destined for my downtown penthouse. As my genuine belongings disappeared into the night, the second crew opened the cargo vans and began unloading the deception. Through my estate liquidation contacts, I had access to a massive warehouse of cheap rented staging furniture. These pieces were designed purely for visual appeal in real estate photos. They looked expensive from a distance, but they were hollow and practically weightless. The crew hauled in a lightweight replica of my sectional couch, positioning it exactly where the real one had been. They assembled a dining table made of cheap veneer over particle board. They set up cardboard bookshelves and placed hollow plastic television shells on the media consoles. I walked from room to room with an iPad, comparing the live feeds from my hidden nanny cams against screenshots I had taken the previous week. The illusion was flawless. On camera, the rented staging props looked identical to the high-end furniture my parents were expecting to see. The house appeared fully furnished and perfectly normal. But in reality, it was a hollow stage set devoid of anything valuable. Hector handed me a clipboard with the final manifest at 4:30 in the morning. "You are all set, Miss Lauren. The trucks are heading to the penthouse now to unload the real furniture." I signed the paperwork and thanked him, locking the garage door as the trucks slipped quietly away into the pre-dawn darkness. I walked through the empty staged house one last time. My footsteps echoed slightly differently against the floorboards now that the heavy furniture was gone. The trap was fully constructed. The bait was set. A few hours later, the sun rose, casting bright morning light across the quiet suburban street. I stood by the front door wearing a stylish trench coat and holding a large hard-shell suitcase that contained nothing but old clothes I intended to donate. At exactly 7:30, a familiar silver sedan pulled into my driveway. My parents had insisted on driving me to the airport. They framed it as a loving gesture, a way to send me off safely on my international adventure. I knew the truth. They wanted to personally verify that I walked through the security gates. They needed visual confirmation that I was gone so they could safely initiate their invasion. I grabbed my suitcase and stepped out onto the porch, locking the front door behind me. My mother practically leaped out of the passenger seat, rushing toward me with an aggressively bright smile. "Lauren, sweetheart, you look so glamorous. Are you ready for London?" "I am completely ready," I replied, forcing my facial muscles to arrange themselves into a pleasant, naive smile. I handed the spare key to her, watching her fingers close around it like a vice. "Thank you again for watching the house, Mom. It means a lot to me." "Oh, it is our pleasure," my father said, popping the trunk of the sedan. He grabbed my suitcase, straining slightly as he lifted it. "You just relax and enjoy your vacation. Do not worry about a single thing back here." The drive to the airport was a masterclass in psychological tension. My parents chattered endlessly about European tourist attractions and currency exchange rates, performing the roles of supportive parents with terrifying ease. I sat in the back seat playing along, agreeing with their recommendations and expressing fake excitement about seeing Big Ben and the Tower of London. Inside, my heart was pounding a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs. When we pulled up to the international departures curb, the chaotic energy of the airport terminal buzzed around us. Travelers rushed past with luggage carts and traffic enforcement officers blew whistles to keep the vehicles moving. My father retrieved my suitcase from the trunk and set it on the sidewalk. My mother pulled me into a tight, suffocating hug. "Have the best time, Lauren," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "We love you so much. Call us when you land." "I will," I promised, pulling away. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the sliding glass doors of the terminal. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I did not turn around. I kept my posture straight and my pace steady as I merged into the sea of travelers. I walked past the ticketing counters and headed directly toward the TSA security checkpoint. I waited until I was completely obscured by a large pillar out of their line of sight. I stopped walking. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and stared at the screen. The time read 8:15 in the morning. A sudden vibration buzzed against my palm. A push notification flashed across my lock screen from my hidden security camera app. Motion detected at front entrance. I tapped the notification, bringing up the live video feed. I watched the screen as a massive, rusted U-Haul truck backed aggressively into my pristine driveway, crushing the edge of my flower bed in the process. The doors of my parents' silver sedan swung open, and Kevin hopped out of the passenger side. He was holding the spare key my mother had just promised to use responsibly. The invasion had officially begun. I turned away from the pillar, pulling my coat tighter around my shoulders, and walked in the opposite direction of the international boarding gates. The airport was a labyrinth of rushing passengers and rolling luggage, but I moved against the current with a calm, deliberate pace. I bypassed the security lines, completely heading straight for the ground transportation exit. A sleek black town car was already idling at the curb arranged the night before. The driver stepped out, opening the rear door for me without asking questions about why I had no luggage. I slid into the plush leather seat and gave him the address of my new building downtown. As the car merged onto the highway leaving the airport and my fabricated London vacation behind, I pulled out my phone and watched the live feed of my former driveway. Kevin was standing on the lawn, waving his arms dramatically as he shouted instructions to two exhausted-looking men hauling a massive, obnoxiously bright gaming chair out of the back of the rented U-Haul. My father was right behind them, carrying a box of tangled computer cables. They were treating my property like a conquered territory. I locked my phone screen, deciding to save the full viewing experience for when I was properly settled. The drive into the city took 40 minutes every mile, putting more distance between me and the family that had spent my entire life taking me for granted. When the town car pulled up to the towering glass facade of my new building, the concierge greeted me by name, opening the door with a respectful nod. The lobby smelled of expensive cedar and polished marble, a sharp contrast to the chaotic suburban energy I had just left behind. I took the private elevator straight to the penthouse level. The doors parted to reveal my new sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the downtown skyline, the morning light catching the edges of the skyscrapers. My real furniture, the authentic mid-century pieces and custom artwork the Midnight Crew had delivered, was already perfectly arranged. It felt like home immediately. I walked into the massive chef's kitchen, opened a chilled cabinet, and pulled out a bottle of genuinely expensive Pinot Noir. I poured myself a generous glass, relishing the quiet clink of crystal. I carried the wine to the expansive kitchen island, opened my laptop, and brought up the master control panel for my security cameras. The grid of high-definition feeds illuminated my screen, giving me a front-row seat to the invasion. Kevin was standing in the center of the living room, his hands on his hips as he surveyed the space. He kicked the leg of the rented staging sofa I had left behind. "Get this garbage out of here," he yelled to the movers, gesturing dismissively at the carefully arranged prop furniture. "She has terrible taste anyway. Toss it all on the curb. I need the entire wall for my curved monitors." I watched in silent fascination as the movers awkwardly picked up the lightweight staging sofa. They exchanged confused glances as they lifted it clearly, realizing it weighed practically nothing, but they did not question the man paying them. They hauled the fake sofa, the hollow media console, and the particle board dining table out the front door, dumping them unceremoniously onto the wet grass by the curb. Kevin strutted around the empty room, directing the placement of his own belongings. He brought in two enormous bought-on-credit, black leather recliners, a chaotic tangle of LED light strips, and a gaming desk that took up nearly a quarter of the room. He was completely taking over, leaving absolutely no trace of my existence. My father was helping him mount a massive television to the wall, driving long screws directly through the pristine drywall I had paid thousands of dollars to have finished just a year ago. It did not matter to them. In their minds, my resources were their resources. My home was simply a waiting vessel for Kevin's eventual needs. I took a slow sip of my wine, leaning closer to the screen. The sheer entitlement on display was staggering, but it only fueled the deep satisfaction blooming in my chest. While Kevin was busy turning the living room into a dark, chaotic gaming cave, my mother appeared on the kitchen camera feed. She strolled into the space with an air of absolute ownership, running her hands over the countertops. She opened the refrigerator, scoffing at the lack of fresh groceries before turning her attention to the pantry. I had left the pantry mostly bare during the midnight swap save for a few boxes of crackers and a wine rack I had specifically staged for this exact moment. Barbara's eyes lit up as she spotted the wine rack. She pulled out a bottle with a very convincing, elegant-looking label. It was actually a cheap, mass-produced table wine I had bought from a discount grocery store for $5, but I had carefully transferred it into a sophisticated bottle left over from an old estate sale. My mother, who fancied herself a connoisseur of the finer things, immediately called my father into the kitchen. "Richard, come look at this," she said, holding the bottle up to the light. Lauren left her private stash behind. We might as well celebrate a successful move. My father wiped drywall dust from his hands and grinned, retrieving a corkscrew from a drawer. I watched them fumble with the cork, their faces glowing with the thrill of getting away with something forbidden. My father poured 2 large glasses of the cheap liquid, handing one to my mother. They clinked the glasses together right in the center of the kitchen. "To Kevin's new chapter," my father said, taking a large gulp. He smacked his lips together, nodding approvingly at the terrible wine. "You can really taste the oak. She must have spent a fortune on this." My mother took a delicate sip, closing her eyes as if savoring a rare vintage. "It is very robust. It is a shame she is so stingy with her nice things, but at least we can put them to good use while she is across the ocean." She leaned against the counter, a deeply smug expression settling over her features. She looked around the kitchen, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone that the hidden microphone picked up perfectly. "She will throw a fit when she gets back, but she won't kick her own brother out onto the streets. It's about time she shared her wealth." I sat in my penthouse swirling the expensive wine in my glass and smiled at the screen. The audacity was truly a marvel to witness. They were standing in a house they had essentially broken into, drinking what they thought was stolen wine and patting themselves on the back for their brilliant manipulation. They were so confident in my submissiveness. They had spent over 3 decades conditioning me to swallow my anger, to apologize for their mistakes, and to sacrifice my own comfort to maintain their fragile family dynamic. They genuinely believed I would walk through that front door in 2 weeks, see Kevin's monstrous leather chairs, and simply resign myself to my fate. The security feed showed my mother pouring herself a second, much larger glass of the discount wine. The alcohol was clearly going to her head, amplifying her inflated sense of victory. She pulled her phone from her purse, her thumbs tapping rapidly across the screen. "Richard," she said, her voice loud and boisterous in the empty kitchen. "We need to make this official. If we get the rest of the family over here to see the setup, Lauren will look completely unreasonable if she tries to kick him out later. The more people who see Kevin settled in, the harder it will be for her to make a scene." My father chuckled, leaning against the refrigerator. "You are right. Let us lock it in. Call Patricia." I watched closely as my mother dialed the phone, putting it on speaker and resting it on the granite island. The line rang twice before my Aunt Patricia's sharp voice filled the room. "Barbara, how did it go?" Patricia demanded immediately. "Is he in?" My mother laughed, a bright, triumphant sound. "We are standing in his new kitchen right now." She practically skipped onto the plane. "Had no idea. The movers are bringing the last of his boxes in as we speak. It is completely done." "Oh, thank goodness," Patricia sighed heavily through the speaker. "I told you she would not put up a fight if you handled it quietly. That girl has always been too worried about looking like the bad guy. It is about time Kevin had a decent place to focus on his work." "Exactly," my mother agreed, taking another sip of the terrible wine. "Listen, Richard and I were talking. We want to make sure Kevin feels completely at home, and we want to solidify the move before Lauren even has a chance to process it when she gets back. We are throwing a party, a surprise housewarming and welcome home party for Kevin, tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. A party." Patricia sounded thrilled. "Oh, Barbara, that is a marvelous idea. It will really cement the transition. I will call Uncle David and the cousins right now. We can make it a whole family affair. I will bring my famous potato salad." "Perfect," my mother beamed. "Tell everyone to park on the street so we do not block the driveway. We want it to be a real celebration. Let us show Kevin that this family supports him, even if his sister is too selfish to do it to his face." They exchanged a few more excited pleasantries before my mother ended the call. She and my father high-fived right in front of the hidden camera. They were drunk on their own perceived cleverness, completely oblivious to the massive, catastrophic legal avalanche heading straight for them. They thought bringing the extended family into the house would trap me. In reality, they were just inviting an audience to witness their own spectacular destruction. As I watched my mother start texting other relatives to build her guest list, my phone vibrated on the desk beside my laptop. I glanced down at the screen. It was a text message from a number I had saved just days prior. The contact name read Valerie. I picked up the phone and opened the message. The text was short, professional, and devastatingly precise. Closing funds have cleared. The deed is recorded. I'll be stopping by the property tomorrow evening with my contractor. I read the words again, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. The timing was nothing short of miraculous. Valerie, the ruthless, no-nonsense district attorney, was officially the legal owner of the property. The house my parents were currently standing in, the house they were actively planning a massive family party for, now belonged to a woman who prosecuted criminals for a living. And she was planning to walk through the front door at the exact time my mother had scheduled her triumphant housewarming event. I typed my response with steady, deliberate fingers, ensuring my tone was light and completely unbothered. "Enjoy the house, Valerie. Feel free to walk right in." I hit send and set the phone face down on the desk. I turned my attention back to the glowing grid of security feeds on my laptop. Kevin was currently dragging a mini fridge into the guest room, scuffing the hardwood floors in the process. My mother was dancing in the kitchen, holding her wine glass up to the light. They were so happy. They were so incredibly confident that they had won. I closed my laptop, plunging the office into quiet darkness, and smiled. Tomorrow evening was going to be the most entertaining family gathering I had ever attended, and I did not even have to leave my couch to enjoy it. The next day dragged on with agonizing slowness as I waited for the evening to arrive. I spent the morning unpacking the last of my boxes in the penthouse and organizing my new office space. By late afternoon, I ordered sushi from my favorite high-end restaurant and poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water. I settled onto my plush sofa and opened my laptop, pulling up the security camera application. The digital clocks on the camera feeds ticked closer to 6. The suburban street outside my old house was already filling with vehicles parked along the curb. Aunt Patricia was the first to arrive, marching up the driveway with a massive bowl of her famously bland potato salad. She was followed closely by Uncle David and a chaotic swarm of my younger cousins. Within 30 minutes, the living room was packed with nearly 20 members of my extended family. They milled around the cheap staging furniture, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in a hollow shell. The hidden microphones picked up the loud chatter and the clinking of bottles as my father handed out cheap beers from a cooler in the kitchen. Kevin was holding court right in the center of the living room. He had changed into a crisp button-down shirt and was leaning casually against the mantel. I turned up the volume on my laptop to catch every word of his performance. He was gesturing widely with a craft beer in his hand, looking incredibly pleased with himself. The audacity radiating from his posture was almost suffocating. He had gathered an audience consisting of Aunt Patricia, 2 of my older cousins, and my mother. They were hanging on to his every word like he was a conquering hero. "It is just temporary." Of course, Kevin told them, projecting a tone of fake humility. "Lauren practically begged me to stay here while she is traveling. She gets so paranoid about the house being empty when she goes overseas. She said having a man around would keep the property secure. Plus, she knows I need a quiet space to draft the business plan for my next major tech venture. It really is a win for both of us. She gets free security, and I get an entire private estate to focus on my incredibly important entrepreneurial goals." I took a slow bite of my sushi, chewing deliberately as I watched Aunt Patricia nod in vigorous agreement. "That is so responsible of you, Kevin," Patricia gushed, placing a hand over her heart. "Lauren has always been terribly anxious and high-strung. It is wonderful that you are willing to sacrifice your own time to help her feel safe. And frankly, it is about time she shared this massive house." It is completely absurd for a single woman to hoard 4 bedrooms while her brilliant brother is trying to launch a new company. It is just selfish. My mother walked into the frame, wiping her hands on a decorative kitchen towel. She beamed at Kevin with absolute adoration. "We are just so proud of him," Barbara announced to the small crowd. "He has such a generous spirit. Lauren is incredibly lucky to have a brother who is willing to step up and take care of her property. We thought throwing this little gathering would be the perfect way to welcome him to the neighborhood. He needs to feel supported as he transitions into this new phase of his highly successful professional life. We all do." The sheer delusion echoing through my laptop speakers was staggering. Kevin was unemployed, broke, and currently squatting in a house he did not own. Yet in this room full of enablers, he was being celebrated as a successful, generous savior. My cousins chimed in praising Kevin for his protective nature and making passive-aggressive comments about my supposed paranoia. Not a single person questioned why I would leave for a 2-week trip and suddenly invite my volatile brother to move his entire life into my home. They simply accepted the narrative that painted Kevin as the absolute best. I watched my father lead a group of uncles down the hallway to show off the guest room where Kevin had set up his massive computer monitors. The camera in the hallway captured my father bragging about the neighborhood property values as if he had personally paid the mortgage. They marveled at the gated community and the proximity to the country club. My family was actively claiming ownership of my accomplishments, twisting my hard work into a communal asset that they could exploit. They were practically measuring the drapes, mentally dividing up the space for their future holiday gatherings. The noise level in the house continued to rise as more relatives arrived. The cheap prop sofa was groaning under the weight of 3 heavy uncles, and someone had spilled a dark drink on the fake rug I had rented. My mother was floating between groups, playing the gracious hostess in a house she had essentially broken into. She was offering tours of the kitchen, pointing out the custom countertops I had installed and taking credit for the design choices. "I created a beautiful home," she told Aunt Patricia. "It is just a shame Lauren rarely appreciates it." I leaned back against my plush couch in the penthouse, sipping my sparkling water. The anger I had felt the previous night had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical anticipation. My family had dug their heels so deeply into this lie that there was no possible way for them to retreat. They had invited an entire audience to witness their triumph. They wanted witnesses to see Kevin firmly established in my home. They wanted the extended family to legitimize his residency. They had built a massive house of cards, and they were incredibly proud of their creation. The digital clock on my screen shifted to 6:15. The party was in full swing. Music was blaring from a portable speaker Kevin had plugged in, and the smell of potato salad and cheap beer likely permeated my pristine kitchen. I kept my eyes glued to the front porch camera feed. The suburban street was quiet, save for the long line of cars parked along the curb. I knew Valerie was a punctual woman. As a district attorney, her schedule was tightly managed. If she said she was coming in the evening, she would be arriving momentarily. Right on time, a sleek dark gray luxury sedan turned onto my street. It bypassed the long line of family cars and pulled squarely into my driveway, parking directly behind my mother's vehicle. The doors opened. A woman stepped out of the driver's seat. It was Valerie. Even through the security camera, her presence was commanding. She wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit and carried a thick leather briefcase. Her posture was rigidly straight, exuding absolute authority. She did not look like a woman attending a suburban housewarming party. She looked like a woman preparing for a courtroom battle. A man stepped out of the passenger side. He was dressed in sturdy work boots, denim jeans, and a heavy canvas jacket. He carried a large clipboard and a laser measuring tool. This was clearly the contractor Valerie had mentioned in her text message. They stood in the driveway for a moment, looking at the house. Valerie frowned, clearly noticing the excessive number of cars parked along the street and the loud music bumping through the front windows. She said something to the contractor, shaking her head in mild annoyance, before marching purposefully up the front walkway. I switched my view back to the interior living room camera. My mother was currently telling a story to Uncle David, waving her hands emphatically. Kevin was laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. They were completely unaware of the storm gathering on the front porch. The front door was closed but entirely unlocked. My parents had left it unsecured to accommodate the arriving guests. They felt completely safe inside their stolen fortress. They believed they were untouchable. I placed my water glass on the coffee table and leaned closer to the monitor. The climax was beginning. On the porch feed, Valerie reached out and gripped the brass door handle. Finding it unlocked, she did not bother to knock. She possessed the legal right to enter her own property. She pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped firmly into the foyer, her contractor following closely behind her. The interior hallway camera caught the exact moment she crossed the threshold. Valerie stopped dead in her tracks. Her sharp eyes swept over the crowded living room, taking in the loud music, the cheap beer bottles resting on the mantel, and the 20 strangers occupying her brand-new house. For a brief, agonizing second, the party continued around her. Then Aunt Patricia, who was standing nearest to the foyer, noticed the formidable woman in the navy suit. Patricia stopped talking. Her eyes darted over Valerie's professional attire. The sudden silence from Patricia caused a ripple effect. Slowly, the conversations in the living room began to die down. The loud music continued to thump, but the voices faded as more relatives turned to stare at the uninvited guests standing in the entryway. My mother, noticing the shift in the rooms, energy turned around to face the front door. Barbara stared at Valerie, her face contorted into a mask of aggressive confusion. My mother despised strangers, especially ones who looked more authoritative than she did. She immediately went on the defensive, her maternal instincts flaring up to protect the territory she had just claimed for her son. Barbara marched across the living room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She positioned herself squarely in front of Valerie, blocking the hallway. She looked the district attorney up and down with obvious disdain, noting the briefcase and the contractor standing quietly behind her with his clipboard ready. "Excuse me," Barbara demanded, her voice loud and incredibly sharp, cutting right through the lingering background music. "Who exactly are you, and what do you think you are doing walking into our house without knocking? This is a private family gathering." The sheer hostility in my mother's tone would have made most people step back and apologize. But Valerie was not most people. She prosecuted hardened criminals daily. She did not flinch. She simply stared back at my mother with an expression of icy, detached bewilderment. She looked at Barbara like she was a mildly annoying stain on the floorboards. "I am looking for the previous owner," Lauren Valerie stated calmly, her voice projecting effortlessly across the silent room, though I was informed the property was entirely vacant. "Who are all of you, and why are you throwing a party in my house?" The word "my" hung in the air like a physical weight. My mother blinked, completely failing to process the sentence. She let out a loud, mocking laugh, turning her head to look at Aunt Patricia as if sharing a joke. Patricia smirked back. Barbara turned her attention back to the imposing woman in the suit. "Your house!" Barbara scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "You must have the wrong address, lady. This house belongs to my daughter Lauren, and she gave my son Kevin explicit permission to live here. Now, I do not know what kind of scam you are trying to pull, but you need to turn around and walk right back out that front door before things get ugly. We do not tolerate neighborhood busybodies crashing our private events." Valerie did not move a single muscle. Her icy demeanor deepened. She slowly unclasped her leather briefcase and reached inside with steady fingers. Kevin, sensing a disruption to his grand housewarming party, pushed his way through the crowd of relatives. He puffed out his chest, stepping up to stand beside my mother. He glared at Valerie, trying to project a tough, masculine presence. "Hey, you heard my mom?" Kevin barked aggressively. "I live here. This is my property now. You and your little construction buddy need to get off my porch before I forcefully remove you. I am not playing games. Get out of my house right now." Kevin took a threatening step forward, invading Valerie's personal space. It was a massive mistake. Valerie pulled a thick, embossed folder from her briefcase. She did not retreat from Kevin's aggressive posturing. Instead, she stood her ground, radiating an intense professional menace. "I strongly advise you to step back, sir," Valerie warned, her tone dropping into a dangerously low register. "I am Valerie Evans. I am the incoming district attorney for this county. And as of 8 o'clock yesterday morning, I am the sole legal owner of this property. The deed is recorded with the county clerk. I hold the title. Lauren sold this house to me. It does not belong to her anymore." The silence in the living room became absolute. The music had stopped. Nobody breathed. The words "district attorney" echoed off the walls. My mother's face went completely slack. The mocking smirk vanished, replaced by a sudden dawning terror. She stared at the thick legal documents Valerie was holding. "No," Barbara stammered, her voice suddenly weak and trembling. "That is impossible. Lauren would never sell this house without telling us. She is in London. She gave me the spare key to watch her plants. You are lying. This is a trick." Kevin shook his head, his face turning an angry crimson. "This is a scam," Kevin yelled, pointing a finger at Valerie. "You forged those papers. My sister would not sell this place. Get out of here before I call the cops." Valerie looked at Kevin with a mixture of pity and absolute contempt. She reached into her suit pocket and pulled out her cell phone. "You do not need to call the police, sir," Valerie said smoothly, tapping the screen with her thumb. "I will gladly do it for you. You have unlawfully entered my private residence. You are trespassing and you just threatened a public official. I am pressing charges." Valerie lifted the phone to her ear. Barbara lunged forward, her hands waving frantically in the air. "Wait, please wait!" My mother shrieked, genuine panic finally breaking through her aggressive facade. "Do not call the police. This is just a massive misunderstanding. Lauren will clear this up. She will explain everything." Barbara spun around, digging frantically through her purse for her cell phone. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. "I am calling Lauren right now on FaceTime. She will tell you this is her house. She will tell you Kevin is supposed to be here. Just wait 1 minute." My mother stood in the center of the living room with her phone pressed tightly against her ear. I watched her through the high-definition security feed on my laptop. Her face was pale, the aggressive confidence from just moments ago completely drained away. She glared at Valerie, her jaw set in a rigid line of stubborn defiance. In the quiet sanctuary of my downtown penthouse, my own cell phone began to vibrate against the sleek glass of my coffee table. The bright screen illuminated the dark room, displaying an incoming FaceTime call from my mother. The custom ringtone sliced through the silence of my apartment, loud and demanding. I did not reach for it. I sat perfectly still on my plush velvet sofa, holding my glass of sparkling water, and watched the dual realities play out in front of me. On my laptop screen, I saw my mother listening to the endless ringing. In my physical space, I listened to the exact same ringing echoing off the high ceilings of my new home. It was a surreal, intoxicating experience. For 33 years, whenever my mother called, I answered. I had been conditioned to drop whatever I was doing to attend to her needs, to manage her emotions, and to keep the peace at all costs. An unanswered phone call in my family was treated as an act of profound disrespect. But tonight, the rules had changed. I let the phone ring. I watched the live feed as the seconds ticked by. My mother's expression shifted from arrogant expectation to mild irritation, and then to a creeping, undeniable anxiety. She pulled the phone away from her ear, stared at the screen to ensure the call had not dropped, and pressed it back against her face. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her designer heels clicking nervously against my old hardwood floors. Valerie remained completely motionless in the foyer. The district attorney did not check her watch, did not sigh, and did not show a single ounce of impatience. She stood with the serene, terrifying calm of a predator that had already secured its prey. Her contractor stood slightly behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes scanning the crowd of my terrified relatives. The silence in the living room was deafening. The party music had been abruptly turned off by one of my cousins, leaving nothing but the sound of heavy collective breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Aunt Patricia was the first to break the stillness. She took a slow, calculated step backward, distancing herself from my mother and Kevin. Patricia was a woman who thrived on gossip and family drama, but she was fiercely protective of her own social standing. Being associated with a home invasion was not on her agenda for the evening. She leaned close to Uncle David, whispering frantically behind her hand. The hidden microphone above the mantel picked up her panicked tone. "David, we need to leave right now," Patricia hissed. "If that woman is really the district attorney, we could all be arrested for breaking and entering. Get the car keys." Uncle David nodded, his face shining with a cold sweat. He began quietly gesturing to their adult children, trying to herd them toward the back sliding glass door. They wanted to slip out through the patio and escape into the night before the authorities arrived. I took a slow sip of my water, marveling at the absolute lack of loyalty among my relatives. The moment the illusion of safety was shattered, they turned on each other instantly. There was no familial solidarity. There was only self-preservation. My father noticed Patricia's retreat. He stepped away from the kitchen counter and moved toward his sister, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Patricia, do not go anywhere," my father pleaded, keeping his voice low. "If you leave now, it makes us look guilty. We have not done anything wrong." Lauren told Kevin he could stay here. "She is just screening her calls because she is on vacation. She will answer in a minute and clear this all up." Patricia scoffed, shaking her head rapidly. "I am not waiting around to find out, Richard. That woman has a briefcase full of legal documents. You told me Lauren practically begged Kevin to move in. You said she handed you the keys and asked you to set everything up. But none of her things are here. The house is empty. We are standing in a staged house." Patricia was finally putting the pieces together. The cheap rented furniture, the hollow televisions, the lack of personal photographs on the walls. The realization was dawning on the entire extended family. They looked around the room with fresh, horrified eyes. The illusion of my lavish, generous lifestyle was dissolving, revealing the stark, empty reality of a hollow set. Kevin was pacing the floor like a caged animal. His false bravado was rapidly evaporating, replaced by the frantic, volatile energy of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. He glared at Valerie, his chest heaving with deep, angry breaths. He could not comprehend that someone was not backing down from his intimidation tactics. In our family, throwing a tantrum always resulted in compliance. My parents had spent 3 decades rewarding his aggression with capitulation. But Valerie was completely immune to his performance. She watched him pace with an expression of mild disgust, the way one might observe an unruly toddler throwing a fit in a grocery store. "Stop looking at me like that," Kevin suddenly screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the district attorney. "You have no right to be here. My sister owns this house. My sister is rich. She has an estate business. She makes hundreds of thousands of dollars. She would never sell this place to someone like you. She left this house to me. I have verbal contracts. I have rights as a tenant." Kevin was shouting legal buzzwords he had likely heard on television, desperately trying to sound authoritative. Valerie did not flinch at his raised voice. She simply adjusted her grip on her leather briefcase. "I do not care how much money your sister makes," Sir Valerie stated, her voice slicing through the room like a steel blade. "I care about the deed recorded at the county courthouse. I care about the transfer of title that was executed legally and perfectly yesterday morning. You are currently trespassing on my private property. You have illegally moved your belongings into my home, and you have threatened a public official in front of 20 witnesses." Kevin let out a frustrated, primal yell. He turned to our mother, who was still holding her phone to her ear, listening to it ring on my coffee table. "Mom, make her answer the phone!" Kevin yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Call her again. Call her until she picks up. Tell her to get this woman out of here before I do something crazy." My mother ended the failed call and frantically tapped my contact name again. My phone illuminated the dark penthouse once more. The ringing resumed. Barbara held the phone up her hand, shaking so violently she nearly dropped the device. "Lauren, pick up the phone right now," my mother muttered to herself, her eyes wide and terrified. "Pick up the phone and fix this. Please, just pick up the phone." I watched the panic escalate from the comfort of my sofa. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation to rescue them from the consequences of their own horrific actions. They had plotted to steal my home. They had gloated about taking advantage of my supposed weakness. They had invited an audience to celebrate their theft. I was simply allowing the natural order of things to unfold. I reached out and traced the rim of my glass, feeling profoundly calm. Through the audio feed of the security cameras, a new sound began to filter into the living room. It started as a faint, distant wail, barely audible over the harsh breathing of my panicked relatives. But it grew steadily louder, the high-pitched, piercing scream of approaching police sirens. Valerie checked the silver watch on her wrist and nodded once satisfied. The response time was excellent. When a district attorney calls the local precinct captain and reports a home invasion, the police do not take their time. They respond with full force. The sound of the sirens sent a shockwave of absolute terror through the crowded living room. My cousin Jessica let out a loud sob, covering her face with her hands. Aunt Patricia shoved past my father, grabbing Uncle David by the arm and dragging him toward the back hallway. "I am not going to jail for this," Patricia screamed, her composure completely shattered. "Move out of my way." "We are leaving through the garage." Several other relatives followed her lead, creating a chaotic stampede toward the back of the house. People were pushing each other, knocking over cheap prop chairs and abandoning their drinks on the rented tables. They were desperate to escape the trap. Valerie stepped forward, raising her voice to address the fleeing crowd. "I advise all of you to remain exactly where you are," she commanded, her tone ringing with absolute legal authority. "If you flee the scene of a reported crime, you will be considered active participants in a coordinated home invasion. The police have already secured the perimeter of the property. The best thing you can do for yourselves is cooperate with the officers when they enter." The stampede halted immediately. Patricia froze in the hallway, looking completely trapped. The reality of the situation pinned them all in place. They were caught. The sirens grew deafeningly loud. They were no longer distant. They were echoing directly down my old suburban street. Flashing red and blue lights swept across the large front windows of the living room, casting chaotic, rotating shadows across the faces of my terrified family. The cheap staging furniture looked even more pathetic, illuminated by the emergency lights. The hollow plastic television on the fake media console seemed to mock the expensive screens Kevin had hauled inside earlier. Kevin backed away from Valerie, his aggressive posture collapsing into pure, unadulterated fear. He bumped into the wall, sliding down slightly until his shoulders hit the edge of a prop bookshelf. He looked like a cornered animal. He had spent his entire life being shielded from the consequences of his actions by our parents. Now the shield was gone, and the consequences were parking in the driveway. My father stood frozen in the center of the room, staring at the flashing lights through the blinds. His jaw was slack. His hands hung uselessly at his sides. The patriarch of the family, the man who had always demanded respect and compliance, was completely powerless. He had no control over this situation. He could not bully or bluster his way out of a felony trespassing charge. The heavy thud of car doors slamming echoed from the driveway. Heavy synchronized footsteps marched up the concrete walkway toward the front porch. The squawk of police radios cut through the night air. The police had arrived. They were walking up to the front door of a house owned by their boss. The tension in the living room was so thick it felt suffocating. Valerie turned to face the front door, standing tall and proud, ready to greet the officers she had summoned. My mother stood rooted to the spot, holding her cell phone out in front of her like a shield. She was crying now, thick, heavy tears ruining her carefully applied makeup. The mascara ran down her cheeks in dark streaks, making her look haggard and wild. She tapped the screen one final time. It was an act of pure desperation. She was dialing my FaceTime number again. She was praying for a miracle. She was praying that her obedient, people-pleasing daughter would answer the phone and somehow make the police the district attorney and the consequences simply disappear. In my penthouse, my phone lit up for the third time. The bright screen displayed my mother's contact photo, a picture of her smiling perfectly at some country club event. I stared at the flashing green accept button. The heavy pounding of police fists against the wooden front door echoed through my laptop speakers. "Police department," a deep, commanding voice shouted from the porch. "Open the door immediately." My mother let out a loud, pathetic wail. She stared at her phone screen, willing me to answer. I set my water glass down on the coffee table. I picked up my phone. I swiped the green button to accept the FaceTime call. The video feed connected with a sharp digital chime. My mother's face filled the screen, her features distorted by the harsh, unflattering angle of the camera and the chaotic flashing of the red and blue police lights outside. She looked absolutely frantic. Her carefully styled hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her makeup was completely ruined by her tears. In stark contrast, I was sitting on my plush velvet sofa, bathed in the soft, warm glow of the ambient lighting in my penthouse. Behind me, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering downtown skyline, a view that screamed luxury and absolute control. I held my phone steady, resting my wrist on my knee, and stared back at her with an expression of complete, unwavering calm. "Lauren! Oh my God, Lauren! Thank goodness!" my mother gasped. Her voice was breathy and high-pitched with sheer terror. "You have to tell them. You have to fix this right now." The heavy, authoritative sound of the front door being thrust open echoed through the audio feed. Several police officers marched into the foyer, their heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floors. They were fully geared, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they scanned the crowded, terrified living room. Valerie did not move a muscle. She simply stood her ground, gesturing calmly toward the center of the room where my parents and my brother were cowering. The lead officer stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Kevin. "Who is in charge here?" the officer demanded, his voice projecting across the silent, frozen crowd of my extended family. My mother shoved her way to the front, practically shoving the phone screen into the officer's face. "It is a mistake," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the immense strain. "We are supposed to be here. This is my daughter's house. She is on the phone right now. She is in London. Tell them, Lauren. Tell the officer you gave us the keys. Tell them you told Kevin he could move in to watch the place." I looked through the screen at the police officer. He leaned down slightly, squinting at the phone to see my face. Behind him, I could see Kevin trembling. My brother, the golden child who had spent his entire life taking what was mine, looked like he was about to vomit. He had shrunk back against the cheap rented staging bookshelf, trying to make himself as small as possible. Aunt Patricia and the rest of the relatives were huddled together near the hallway, their eyes wide with morbid, undeniable horror. They were trapped, forced to witness the exact moment their enabling behavior collided with the brutal reality of the law. Valerie stepped up beside the police officer, her leather briefcase still gripped firmly in her hand. She looked directly into the camera of my mother's phone. Her gaze met mine through the digital connection. There was a silent, mutual understanding that passed between us in that brief second. We were both women who did not tolerate being disrespected. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, letting the silence stretch out and wrap tightly around my mother's throat. "Lauren, say something," my mother pleaded, her voice dropping into a desperate, pathetic whimper. "Please, just tell them you let Kevin move in. Tell them this woman is crazy." I lowered my glass and set it gently on the coffee table. I looked directly into the camera lens, ensuring my eyes were locked onto my mother's panicked face. I kept my voice incredibly level, devoid of any anger or heightened emotion. I spoke with the icy, detached professionalism of someone delivering a basic weather report. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Mom," I stated clearly. The words rang out from the small speaker of her phone, carrying perfectly across the dead silent living room. Every single person in that house heard me. The collective gasp from my extended family was audible through the microphone. "What are you doing?" my mother gasped, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. "Stop playing around. Tell them the truth." "I am telling the truth," I replied smoothly, leaning back into the soft cushions of my sofa. I did not give Kevin permission to move into that house. I never gave him permission to bring a single piece of his furniture inside. I did not invite any of you over for a housewarming party, and I am certainly not in London right now. My mother shook her head rapidly, as if the physical motion could somehow negate the words I was saying. "No, no, you gave me the spare key," she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "You told me to check on the plants. You told me to keep the place safe. You are lying. Why are you lying to them?" "I gave you a spare key to water plants," I corrected her, keeping my tone deadly calm. "I did not give you a lease agreement. I did not give you permission to move a 30-year-old man into my property behind my back. But none of that actually matters anymore, Mom." The confusion on her face deepened, warping her features into a mask of pure desperation. "What do you mean it does not matter?" she cried out. "It matters. We are your family. We are just trying to help your brother." I took a deep centering breath. This was the moment. The exact moment I had been planning for, waiting for, and orchestrating for days. I delivered the final crushing blow without a single ounce of hesitation. "Because I do not own that house anymore, Mom," I declared. "I sold the property, the closing funds cleared, and the deed officially transferred yesterday morning." My mother froze. The phone trembled in her hand as the devastating truth finally pierced through her stubborn delusions. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin sickly gray. She stared at me through the screen, her mouth hanging open in silent comprehension. Kevin let out a loud, choked gasp from his corner of the room, dropping his gaze to the floor in defeat as his arrogant bravado shattered. "I sold it to Valerie." I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. "The woman standing right next to the police officer is the sole legal owner of the property you are currently standing inside. You did not just break into my house, Mom. You broke into her house, and you did it without a single shred of legal right. You orchestrated a home invasion, and you dragged Kevin and the entire extended family right into the middle of it." Valerie nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion that signaled the absolute end of the line for my parents. She turned to the lead police officer, gesturing toward Kevin and my parents with a firm, uncompromising hand. The officer stepped forward, his hand moving to the heavy metal handcuffs on his belt. The reality of the situation crashed down upon the living room like a thick concrete wall. I did not give Kevin permission to do anything, I stated firmly, offering my final closing remark to the audience of silent enablers. I certainly did not give him permission to break into a district attorney's home, and I am not going to save him. I will not protect you from the severe legal consequences of your deeply arrogant choices. I reached forward and ended the call. The screen on my laptop went completely black for a fraction of a second as the FaceTime connection severed, immediately snapping back to the high-definition security feed. I sat back on my velvet sofa, listening to the absolute suffocating silence that had fallen over my former living room. My mother remained frozen, with her arms still extended, holding her phone out to an empty room, as if she could somehow force my voice to come back through the speaker. She slowly lowered her hand. The device slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered harshly against the hardwood floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. The sound of the plastic hitting the wood seemed to act as a starting gun for the police officers. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man who looked completely devoid of patience, stepped right into the center of the room. He positioned himself between Valerie and the cowering cluster of my relatives. He turned his attention directly to Kevin. My brother was pressing his back so hard against the cheap staging bookshelf that the flimsy cardboard backing was visibly buckling. "Sir," the officer commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument or negotiation, "step away from the wall and keep your hands where I can see them." Kevin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly on the camera feed. He slowly shuffled forward, his hands raised to his chest in a gesture of frantic surrender. "Officer, you have to listen to me," Kevin stammered, his voice cracking. "My mother told me I could live here. She gave me the spare key. I brought all my expensive stuff inside. Look around. You can see my leather chairs. You can see my gaming monitors. I am a tenant. You cannot just kick a tenant out onto the street without a proper legal eviction notice. It takes 30 days. I know my rights." The officer did not look at the leather chairs. He did not look at the gaming monitors. He looked directly at Kevin with a flat, unimpressed expression. "Do you have a signed lease agreement with the legal owner of this property?" the officer asked. Kevin blinked, his eyes darting frantically toward my parents for help. "No, but my sister," the officer cut him off immediately, holding up a heavy-gloved hand. "Your sister does not own this property. The district attorney owns this property. So I will ask you again. Do you have a signed lease agreement?" "No," Kevin whispered, his voice shrinking. "Do you have a single utility bill for this address registered in your legal name?" The officer continued, his tone becoming increasingly clinical and authoritative. "Water, electricity, internet. Anything at all." Kevin shook his head, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. "Do you currently have a piece of mail addressed to you at this location?" the officer pressed, taking a slow step closer. "A bank statement, a credit card bill, a forwarded package." "Nothing," Kevin choked out, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "I just got here today. I just moved my stuff in 2 hours ago. My mom has the key. She is the one who unlocked the front door." The officer nodded slowly, pulling a small notepad from his breast pocket. "So you have no lease, no utility bills, no mail, and you do not even possess a key to the front door. Sir, you are not a tenant. You have absolutely no legal right to occupy this space. You are a trespasser." My father finally snapped out of his stunned paralysis. He rushed forward, waving his hands in a desperate attempt to defuse the rapidly escalating situation. "Officer, please," my father begged, his voice trembling with a pathetic, uncharacteristic weakness. "This is just a massive family misunderstanding. We did not know the house was sold. We honestly thought we had permission to be here. We will just pack up my son's things and leave. We can have everything out of here in an hour. We will never bother this woman again. Just let us get the moving truck backed up to the porch." Valerie stepped out from behind the officer. She smoothed the lapels of her sharp navy blue suit, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying power. "I am afraid it is entirely too late for that," Valerie stated, her voice echoing coldly off the bare walls of the staged living room. "You do not get to break into a private residence, throw a loud party, and then simply pack up and walk away when you get caught." Furthermore, she turned to look directly at the lead officer. "When I arrived at my property, this man," she pointed a manicured finger directly at Kevin, "aggressively approached me. He invaded my personal space, screamed in my face, and explicitly threatened to physically remove me from my own home if I did not leave immediately. That is a direct threat of violence against a public official." The lead officer's expression hardened instantly. He turned back to Kevin, his hand dropping purposefully to the metallic handcuffs resting on his duty belt. "Is this true?" the officer demanded. "Did you threaten this woman?" Kevin let out a high-pitched, panicked squeak. "I did not know she was a district attorney," Kevin wailed, taking another terrified step backward until he hit the wall. "I thought she was just some crazy lady crashing my housewarming party. I was just trying to protect my property. I did not actually touch her." "You do not have to touch someone to commit assault," the officer stated bluntly. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The heavy metal links clinked together, a sharp, terrifying sound that seemed to paralyze every single relative in the room. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded. Kevin froze. He stared at the metal cuffs, his eyes wide and unblinking. He looked like he was suffocating. "No," Kevin breathed, shaking his head rapidly. "No, please, you cannot arrest me. I am a tech entrepreneur. I cannot have a criminal record. It will ruin my background checks for venture capital funding. Please, I will leave. I will carry the couch out right now." "Turn around," the officer repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "Do it now, or you will be charged with resisting arrest." Kevin slowly turned around. He placed his shaking hands behind his back. The officer stepped forward and grabbed his wrists. The ratcheting sound of the metal cuffs echoed through the hidden microphones. For 30 years, my parents had shielded him from every single consequence. But they could not pay off the police. They could not manipulate a district attorney. The shield was gone. As the cold metal bit into his wrists, something inside Kevin completely shattered. The arrogant, entitled golden child vanished, replaced by a sobbing, hysterical mess. Tears poured down his face in thick, messy streams. He let out a loud, agonizing wail that sounded like a wounded animal. He whipped his head around to look at my parents, his face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "This is your fault," Kevin screamed at them, spit flying from his lips as he thrashed against the officer's grip. "You told me this was a sure thing. You told me Lauren was a pushover and she would just accept it. You promised me a free house." I sat back in my quiet penthouse and watched the spectacular, complete implosion of their incredibly toxic family dynamic unfold. The click of handcuffs breaking the spell paralyzed my parents. My mother gasped, hands flying to her mouth, watching the officer guide my sobbing brother toward the foyer. My father surged forward, face flushed with panic. Ignoring the officers, he threw himself into the district attorney's path. He held his hands up in a begging gesture, arrogance replaced by groveling defeat. "Please," my father begged, voice cracking. "You cannot take him away. He is just a kid. He did not understand. We will pay for damages and your time. Just let him go. This is a mistake." Valerie did not step back. She looked at my father with cold eyes, adjusting her briefcase, unbothered by his pleading. "He is a 30-year-old man who illegally entered my property and threatened physical violence," Valerie stated with legal precision. "He is not a kid making a mistake. He is an adult committing a felony, experiencing the consequences. I do not want money, sir. I want you out." My mother rushed forward, her tear-streaked face showing absolute desperation. Reaching toward Valerie's arm, a sharp look from the second officer made her snatch her hand back. She pivoted, appealing to whatever sympathy this ruthless prosecutor possessed. "His entire life is in this house," my mother wailed, sweeping her arm toward the living room. "He moved everything inside. He has thousands of dollars worth of custom monitors and brand new leather recliners bought on credit. You cannot just arrest him and lock us out. His worldly possessions are sitting right here." I leaned closer to my laptop, captivated by the sheer entitlement radiating from my mother. While her son marched out in handcuffs, she tried negotiating a real estate deal for his screens. She genuinely believed his unpaid electronics granted them a moral high ground. Valerie slowly swept her gaze over the chaotic array of gaming chairs, boxes, and black wires littering her living room. She looked back at my mother with profound, chilling indifference. "Let me explain the law clearly," Valerie said, her tone dropping into an authoritative register demanding absolute silence. "When an individual unlawfully enters a private residence and leaves personal belongings without consent, those items lack tenant rights. Legally, everything your son dragged into my house today is abandoned property." My father choked, eyes widening in horror. "You cannot keep his things," he shouted, voice cracking with panic. "That is theft. That equipment is worth a fortune. He needs those computers." "I am a district attorney, sir," Valerie replied smoothly, a humorless smile touching her lips. "I do not steal. I simply follow the letter of the law. I have zero interest in keeping your son's cheap gaming monitors or ugly leather chairs. However, I am not allowing you to delay my contractors tomorrow morning just so you can casually pack up your illegal campsite." My mother let out another loud, pathetic sob, her hands pulling at her own hair in frustration. "What are we supposed to do?" she cried out. "You cannot just keep his whole life locked away in there. He will be ruined." Valerie checked her watch, maintaining her calm composure. "I am feeling surprisingly generous this evening," Valerie stated. "I will not hold your son's abandoned property hostage, but I will not allow you to remain inside my house for another second. Therefore, I am going to hire a professional junk removal company to clear this space." They will drag every single item your son brought inside out the front door, and they will dump it directly onto the wet grass next to the curb. You are more than welcome to stand on the public sidewalk and guard his belongings in the rain until you can procure a moving truck to haul it all away. The reality of Valerie's brutal compromise settled over my parents like a heavy, suffocating blanket. They were going to be forced to stand on the side of the road in the dark, watching a crew of strangers toss their precious golden child's expensive electronics onto the damp suburban lawn. It was the ultimate inescapable humiliation. But the humiliation was not confined strictly to my parents. The harsh, uncompromising reality of the situation was rapidly sinking in for the 20 extended family members still huddled near the back hallway. They had spent the entire evening drinking cheap beer and celebrating Kevin's supposed real estate victory. Now they were standing in the middle of an active crime scene, fully aware that they were complicit in a coordinated home invasion. Aunt Patricia, the woman who had proudly spearheaded the guest list and bragged about my supposed generosity just an hour ago, stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. Her face was a twisted mask of absolute fury and deep primal embarrassment. She glared at my mother, her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. "Barbara, what in the world is wrong with you?" Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. "You told me Lauren practically begged you to set this up. You told all of us this was a completely legitimate family gathering. You invited us to a break-in. You made us accessories to a felony." My mother flinched, shrinking back away from her older sister. "Patricia, please." My mother stammered, raising her hands defensively. "It is not what it looks like. Lauren tricked us. She set us up. She deliberately sold the house without telling us just to make us look bad. She is trying to ruin the family." Patricia let out a loud, scoffing laugh that sounded dangerously unhinged. "Do not, you dare try to blame Lauren for this," Patricia yelled, taking an aggressive step toward my mother. "You lied to my face. You lied to this entire family so you could show off and pretend your deadbeat son was finally a success. You are standing here arguing about television screens while Kevin is being shoved into the back of a police cruiser. You are completely delusional." Uncle David grabbed his coat. His face flushed dark red with shame. He looked at my father with deep, profound disgust. "I cannot believe I took time off work to come celebrate this absolute train wreck," Uncle David spat, shaking his head. "You people are out of your minds. I am not spending another second in this house, and I am certainly not sticking around to answer questions from the police because you decided to play real estate developer with someone else's property." The mass exodus began instantly. The extended family did not wait for formal goodbyes. They completely ignored my mother's frantic, tearful pleas to stay and support them during this difficult time. They physically pushed past each other, making a frantic dash for the front door, desperate to escape the property, before the few remaining police officers decided to start collecting witness statements or checking identification. Aunt Patricia led the charge, shoving her way past my father without a second glance. She did not even bother to retrieve her famous potato salad from the kitchen counter. She stormed out the front door, her heavy heels stomping aggressively down the concrete walkway. The younger cousins and uncles followed closely behind her, pulling their jackets tight against the evening chill. Their faces lowered to avoid making eye contact with the police officers standing in the driveway. I sat perfectly still in my quiet and secure penthouse, captivated by the chaotic, beautiful, and completely justified destruction unfolding on my screen. The flashing lights of the police cruisers cast red and blue reflections against the slick pavement as the cold rain finally started to fall. I leaned closer to my monitor, watching the scene shift from a dramatic arrest to a humiliating administrative process. Given that Kevin had no prior criminal record, they opted to issue him a formal citation for criminal trespass rather than hauling him to the station. The officer unlocked the heavy metal cuffs, pulling Kevin's arms forward. Kevin rubbed his reddened wrists, his face devoid of arrogance. The officer handed him a yellow slip of paper, pointed a stern finger at his chest, and delivered a final warning to never set foot on the property again. The cruisers backed out of the driveway, leaving my parents and brother alone with the district attorney. The rain escalated rapidly to a punishing downpour. The sudden storm turned the manicured suburban lawn into a slick, muddy mess within minutes. Valerie stood under the protective overhang of the front porch, perfectly dry in her tailored navy suit. Her contractor disappeared into the kitchen and returned holding a steaming ceramic mug of coffee. Valerie accepted the mug, wrapping both hands around the warm surface. She took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the steam curl into the cold night air. She looked down at my parents and brother, who were getting soaked on the driveway. "You have exactly 20 minutes before my junk removal team arrives to clear this living room," Valerie announced, her voice projecting clearly over the sound of the pouring rain. "They are paid double time to haul everything inside directly to the local county landfill. If you want to keep any of these electronic toys, I suggest you start carrying them to the public sidewalk right now." My father wiped rain and sweat from his forehead. He looked at the massive pile of equipment Kevin had demanded they bring inside just hours ago. "Richard," my mother cried, her voice carrying over the storm. "We cannot leave his things out here. They will be ruined. The water will destroy the monitors. We have to get them into the car." My father looked at their silver sedan parked tightly at the end of the driveway. The trunk was already full of tools and boxes they had brought for the invasion. There was no way they could fit 2 massive leather recliners, a heavy gaming desk, and 3 oversized computer monitors into a standard passenger vehicle. They had no backup plan for a sudden eviction. "Then you better start moving them to the curb," Kevin yelled, his voice cracking with panicked desperation. "Those monitors cost $2,000 each. I put them on my credit card. Do not just stand there. Help me carry the screens." The physical comedy of the next 20 minutes was a masterpiece. I watched as my father and spoiled brother attempted to haul a massive curved television screen out the front door. They struggled under the weight, their wet shoes slipping on the damp porch steps. The rain beat down on the expensive electronics water, quickly seeping into the ventilation grills. My mother was running back and forth with armfuls of tangled cords, keyboards, and expensive headsets. She was crying hysterically, her designer shoes caked in thick, dark mud. Valerie did not offer a single word of sympathy. She stood by the front door, sipping her coffee, occasionally stepping aside to let my struggling family members pass her. "Make sure you do not scratch the door frame," Valerie warned calmly, as Kevin and my father awkwardly wrestled a heavy leather recliner through the entryway. "You are already paying for trespassing. You do not want to add property damage." Kevin groaned loudly, his grip slipping on the wet leather. The heavy chair crashed down onto the porch, pinching my father's fingers against the concrete. Richard let out a sharp yell of pain, dropping to his knees to clutch his hand. "Dad, get up," Kevin screamed, completely ignoring his father's injury. "The rain is soaking into the cushions. It is going to mold. We have to get it to the street, too." My mother rushed over, trying to help my father stand, while Kevin selfishly tried to drag the heavy chair down the wet steps by himself. Kevin dropped to his knees in the wet grass, finally realizing that his prized possessions were being irreparably destroyed by the storm. He was watching his entire fabricated, entitled life wash away into the suburban gutters. They spent the next 15 minutes frantically dragging the rest of the awkward furniture across the muddy lawn. They were slipping, sliding, and fighting with each other the entire time. Kevin was screaming at my father for not moving fast enough. My father was clutching his injured hand, cursing under his breath as the cold rain pounded against his back. They were tearing each other apart, completely unraveling under the pressure of their own catastrophic failure. I sat on my velvet sofa holding my glass of wine and watched the spectacular grand finale of their toxic entitlement. They finally managed to drag the last oversized gaming monitor to the public sidewalk, piling it recklessly on top of the ruined leather chairs and the soggy cardboard boxes. The pile looked like a pathetic monument to their greed. They stood on the curb, completely drenched, covered in mud, and utterly humiliated. Valerie took one final, deliberate sip of her warm coffee. She gave them a polite and entirely dismissive nod, and then she stepped back inside the house. She pulled the heavy, solid wooden door shut, the deadbolt engaging with a loud, final click that echoed sharply through the outdoor microphone. They were left standing hopelessly on the edge of the street, shivering in the pouring rain, guarding a pile of ruined electronics that they had no possible way to transport. I took a deep breath, letting the absolute peace of my perfectly secure downtown penthouse completely wash over me. My phone lit up on the coffee table next to my wine glass. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I watched it vibrate slowly. Part of me considered letting it ring into the void. But seeing her name flashing persistently on the screen, I realized that ignoring the call would leave a tiny thread of communication intact. She would keep calling. She would keep leaving desperate, manipulative voicemails. I reached forward, picked up the phone, and swiped to accept the call. I brought the device to my ear but remained completely silent, letting her speak first. The sound of heavy rain hitting pavement filtered through the speaker, accompanied by the chaotic background noise of cars driving past their miserable curb. Then came the harsh, wet sound of my mother gasping for air. She was sobbing hysterically. It was not the theatrical crying she used to manipulate family members at dinner parties. This was raw, agonizing panic. Her entire fabricated reality had just been dismantled on a public street, and she was drowning in the fallout. "Lauren!" My mother choked out, her voice cracking wildly. "How could you do this? How could you be so incredibly cruel to your own flesh and blood? You ruined your brother's life. He is sitting on the sidewalk in the rain with nothing. Everything he owns is destroyed. You set us up. You deliberately sold the house and let us walk right into a trap. We could have gone to jail tonight." I listened to her frantic accusations. She was still incapable of taking an ounce of responsibility. She was completely ignoring the fact that they had broken into a house they did not own, moved a grown man inside without permission, and planned to steal my property. In her distorted mind, the crime was not their home invasion. The crime was my refusal to be a silent, compliant victim. "You ruined his life, Mom," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You ruined him by shielding him from every single consequence he ever earned. You taught him that he was entitled to everything I worked for. You taught him that taking my things was acceptable. Tonight, the real world simply taught him otherwise." My mother let out a loud, pathetic wail. "We are your parents. We raised you. We loved you. You are a heartless, vindictive monster. How are we supposed to fix this? How are we supposed to explain this to the family? They all left us standing here. Nobody will answer our calls. Aunt Patricia drove right past us. You humiliated us in front of everyone." "You did this to yourself," I stated flatly. "You invited the audience to watch you steal my house. You wanted everyone to see Kevin take over my space. You engineered your own public humiliation because your arrogance blinded you to the reality of the law. You thought I would just roll over and take the abuse." "But Lauren, please," she begged, her tone suddenly shifting from anger to a pathetic, desperate whine. "We are family. You have to help us. Kevin has nowhere to go. We cannot fit his things in the car. Please just wire us some money for a moving truck. Just give us something to help him get a hotel. You have so much. You can afford it." The sheer, unfathomable audacity of her request hung in the air. She had just been caught trying to steal a massive 4-bedroom house from me, and she was still standing on the curb asking for a handout. The entitlement was a terminal disease. "You wanted me to just accept things to keep the peace," I said slowly, ensuring every single syllable landed with absolute clarity. "That is what you told Dad when you were plotting this entire scheme in my living room. You said I would not make a scene. You said I would just accept it. Well, Mom, you were right. I decided to take your advice. I accepted things exactly as they are, so I did. I accepted that you are toxic, and I found my peace." A thick, heavy silence fell over the line, broken only by the sound of the rain pelting the phone on her end. My mother had no response. The manipulation had finally hit a brick wall. "Don't ever contact me again," I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button to end the call. I immediately opened my settings. I blocked her number. I blocked my father's number. I blocked Kevin's number. I went through my contact list and blocked Aunt Patricia, Uncle David, and every single relative who had eagerly shown up to that party to celebrate my exploitation. With each block, I severed another toxic root. 6 months later, the morning sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown penthouse. I stood in my pristine kitchen, wearing a comfortable silk robe, and poured freshly brewed coffee into a ceramic mug. The city below was waking up a vibrant grid of movement and opportunity. The air in my home was completely still peaceful and entirely my own. My estate liquidation business had experienced its most profitable quarter to date. Without the constant draining emotional weight of my family dragging me down, my focus had sharpened. I had recently closed a massive contract with a historic estate, expanding my team and securing my reputation as the top liquidator in the state. I walked over to the velvet sofa and sat down, letting the warmth of the coffee mug seep into my palms. There had been no further contact from my parents or my brother. The silence they left behind was not a void. It was a wide open space filled with freedom. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looking out over the magnificent skyline. I had built a beautiful, secure life. I had defended my kingdom, and I was finally enjoying the view. Here is the lesson and call to action derived from the story written from the narrator's perspective as requested. If you have listened to my story, the biggest takeaway I want to leave you with is this: keeping the peace should never require you to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. For years, I allowed my family to trample over my boundaries because I believed that blood dictated unconditional loyalty. I was conditioned to think that accepting their toxic behavior and shrinking myself down was the only way to be a good daughter and sister. But here is the harsh reality. I had to learn people who genuinely love and respect you will not plot to steal from you, exploit your hard work, or manipulate your desire for harmony. When my parents conspired to move my entitled brother into my home, they weren't making a simple mistake, they were actively capitalizing on a lifetime of my compliance. Walking away from family is one of the hardest, most agonizing decisions you can ever make. Society constantly tells us that family is everything, but sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is recognize that a shared last name does not give anyone a free pass to abuse you. Establishing a firm, uncompromising boundary isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of radical self-preservation. I didn't set that trap out of malice. I simply stopped protecting them from the brutal consequences of their own actions. Once I stopped absorbing their chaos, I finally found the quiet, beautiful peace I actually deserved. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with toxic family members who mistook your kindness for weakness? How did you finally break free from the cycle of just keeping the peace? Share your stories and experiences in the comments below. If my journey to reclaiming my life resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries, protecting your peace, and finding your true worth.